Okay. Well, again, welcome everyone. We're so glad you could join us. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Amber Masso, and I am the Director of Communications and Alumni Engagement for the Terry Foundation. I'm super excited to be here with our virtual panel this evening, and we're going to talk about graduate school. So first and foremost, we're going to go ahead and let everyone introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about where they've come from, what their experience is, and then we'll get right into our discussion. So Zara, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Thank you, Amber. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zehra Hussain. I am a 2014 UNT Terry Scholar. I majored in political science and I minored in medical anthropology. And after graduating from UNT, which was about 2018, I decided to pursue a master's in health policy at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And that kind of led me to do an internship with the federal government, and that led to a full-time job, which is what I currently work at as a federal government employee. I work in the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services agency, and I am a health policy analyst for that agency. So basically, that's just a fancy word for saying drafting legislation for Medicare and Medicaid policies. So it's fun, I enjoy it. And currently I moved from DC back to Dallas. And so I'm really grateful to be back here, give back to my community and be more engaged with the Terry community here. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Holly Van Houten. I was not a Terry Scholar, but I am a Scholar Relations Coordinator who works with the Terry Foundation. I completed my undergrad degree at the University of North Texas. My bachelor's is in biology with a minor in chemistry. I know that sounds exactly like Scholar Relations and working with scholarships. But after I graduated, I worked in the financial aid office with the scholarships team and the grants team, and helped kind of set up the Terry program there before starting to work at the Terry Foundation. So a little bit different from the other panelists tonight, I did not go into my master's program until 2017. So I graduated in 2008 and then took 9 years to decide what master's program I wanted to do. I went to Colorado State University. I did a completely online program in student affairs and higher education. And that helped me to learn more about student development theory, the way that college administration works, how things happen on campus, how the budget works, and all that kind of stuff. So that helps me in my job right now at the Terry Foundation. That's all.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lorenzo Washington. I was a 2014 Terry at Texas A&M University. I double majored in animal science and bioenvironmental sciences and got a minor in Japanese because I wanted to escape STEM for a little bit. And then after graduating in 2018, thanks to some undergraduate research experience, I realized I wanted to go on and get a graduate degree and continued on here at UC Berkeley, where I'm currently pursuing my PhD. I'm in my 3rd year now, and I'm studying my PhD is in plant biology. Specifically, I'm studying how certain aspects of the plant cell walls, specifically like the plasma membrane and other aspects, how they're involved in regulating and establishing symbiotic relationships in root systems. So I get to do a lot of nice microscopy, a lot of molecular biology work, and with the big goal of sustainable ag is like our big thought. Yeah.
Awesome. And my name is Landon Cowan. I am a 2013 UNT Terry Scholar. I am currently in my 1st year of a doctoral program in applied behavior analysis. While I was at UNT, I double majored in behavior analysis and Spanish. Don't call me on the Spanish part. That part has not been sufficiently maintained lately. But after UNT, and I graduated in the spring of 2017, I went to the University of Houston Clear Lake, which is right next to NASA, and did a master's degree in behavior analysis. And that's what brought me up to this point. I'm now up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, finishing my, or starting my, God, finishing, yeah, right. Starting my doctoral work in behavior analysis. And the field of behavior analysis is the field of studying human and non-human animal behavior and its relations with the environment. So what in our environment influences behavior? And from that, we design interventions that can improve the quality of life of humans and non-humans alike. So a lot of my work currently is centered around the provision of services to individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities such as autism spectrum disorder. So I'm working specifically with these folks on increasing adaptive skills and decreasing problematic behaviors. And I do research related to that area, as well as the training of other graduate students in these practices.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of you so much for joining us this evening. And as our audience can tell, you all have a diverse set of experiences when it comes to your education background, to the different programs that you have pursued or are pursuing. So that brings us really into our first question for the discussion. Why graduate school? How can a person determine whether or not they should even attend graduate school? And again, panel, we have a couple of you that'll primarily answer each question, but everyone else, feel free to jump in, with anything that you would like to add. So Holly and Lorenzo, I'd love for y'all to start off this first one. Just how did a person determine whether or not they should go to graduate school?
I guess I'll go first. I feel like for me, I obviously took time to decide. However, I guess I skipped the part where when I graduated, with my bachelor's degree, I did immediately go into a master's program. I was doing a master's program in biology with an emphasis in teaching. So I took all the teaching certification classes and took some grad level biology classes. And then I decided I did not want to teach high school anymore. And I wanted to work with college students, which is who I was working with in the financial aid office anyway. So I kind of took opportunities that came along to me, as like working with the Terry Foundation and Terry Scholars, but I took the time to think about what I knew I wanted to get more education, but I didn't know what area. So what field, what program, what type of program, because I did an online program. I knew I needed to keep my job so that I could pay for the school, because most of the programs I was interested in didn't offer a lot of financial aid options or scholarships and that kind of thing. So I took time, I looked at MBA programs, I looked at nonprofit programs. It took a really long time, but once I finally figured out that I wanted to study higher education, then even from there that you look at, what things certain programs focus on. So I knew I wanted to go into a program that would focus on diversity and inclusion and not just be a very, this is how the accounting works and this is how, you get to be a higher up and that kind of thing. I really looked at those things, but I think for you personally, you have to decide, this is something I want to commit my time to. This is something I want to commit my effort to, my money to, if you're personally paying for it, if you're taking out loans. So that's a really big decision to make, and it is a time commitment. So it depends on what your life looks like outside of going to school. So I think it's really important to make sure that your why is figured out before you just jump in and start a grad program. I'll let Lorenzo talk to his experience because it's different.
Yeah, definitely want to echo the why part. Like figuring out your why is very important. I guess for a little context, for me, I hadn't ever thought about grad school until kind of late into my junior year, to be honest, even though I was doing a lot of undergrad research since I got to campus at A&M, it never really crossed my mind I would do anything after I got my bachelor's, staying in academia. I thought I would go off and do something else. And then it was kind of this combination of thinking, well, what do I really want to do when I graduate? And it's like, while I love it, I don't want to do like environmental remediation stuff. It doesn't really tickle the brain like I want it to. And I like animal science, but I'm good with it. I'm done. And the more I thought, I was like, well, like I want to do like research-based work. And I'm really enjoying the plant stuff I'm doing. If I want to keep doing this or do something like this, you know, not having a graduate degree is kind of, it's not like my career is kind of stuck at that point, but it's like, it gets a lot harder. And all the avenues that don't involve grad school, I might as well have done grad school anyways, because it's giving me the same environment, provided I find the right opportunity. And so for me, after like, you know, and I went to like different, you know, focus groups, like different organizational groups on campus that talked about, you know, what grad school can be like, and other things to keep in mind. And the more I thought, I was like, you know, I might as well just dive in. And while I'm still on the energy of wanting to do education, knock out this, you know, quote unquote, knock out this PhD, and, you know, go forward with that. And so for me, that was part of figuring out, you know, is this relevant to me? And the longer I thought about it, the more I was like, grad school's kind of the only avenue I see myself taking anymore. And so then it was, okay, figuring out what's next. And I think the other important part about why grad school is understanding that even though my end goals involved grad school, a really, really like 50% crucial part of that was finding the right program. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but ultimately I just want to talk about like, going to grad school for the sake of grad school, I highly recommend against, especially if you're talking about like a PhD, like I'm spending half a decade minimum of my life here if I want to leave here with a doctorate. And also funding, you know, and those things are a really important consideration. So this isn't kind of a lighthearted decision. And it's okay to be picky, you know, like we have time, you know, you don't have to jump right off the boat and hop into a grad program. Really being picky and making sure that where you're going is where you really want to go, or rather it's a place that you think has a lot of different opportunities so you can really find out where you want to go after, is really important to actually making that commitment to going to grad school, as opposed to just deciding you need to go or want to go.
So one of the questions that we received in the registration was, I think, people trying to figure out, how did you decide what route to take? So like, how did y'all decide between a master's program versus a PhD program and how far you wanted to go? And I think maybe that's where, Landon, I especially would like to hear from you, because you did the master's and then you went on to a PhD. Like, what was the decision-making process like for you in going after two programs consecutively like that?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I sound probably a little crazy or out of my mind a little bit for staying in school that long, right? So I think for my field specifically, it is more beneficial and is more common for graduate programs to be structured that way. So some fields do have more options available to where you could go straight into a doctoral program or just a terminal master's program, right? So if you just wanted the master's, those are certainly out there. And my field has a lot of those, because terminal master's programs produce the basic practitioner level that is required for most jobs in behavior analysis. For me, the reason I chose my master's program specifically was because of the type of professors and faculty that were there. And even though they were only a master's level program, they were doing doctoral level research. And that was a big pull for me in my decision making. Was I love conducting research, and I love the clinical services on top of it. That's just, you know, cherry on top of all of it, right? But for me, I had to look at where are the collection of schools or programs that are going to give me the best set of experiences and the breadth of experiences that I want in order to be a well-trained doctoral level researcher or professor in my field. And so I knew, even when I enrolled in that master's program, I knew I wanted to get my PhD, and I specifically chose my master's program to help me get to that goal. So I think that is also something that factors into your decision making of which programs you're going to apply to, is what are those programs going to do for you in order to get you to your ultimate goal. But if you don't know your ultimate goal, like if it's also great to just jump into a master's program if you definitely know you want the master's program. You don't have to know that you want a PhD when you enter a master's program. It is okay to know that or to not know that. So don't read into what I'm saying that says that you have to know that right off the bat.
So Zara, did you have anything you wanted to add? Because otherwise, I think this the discussion about how it would prepare you for the ideal career you're trying to build kind of takes us into the next question I was going to ask.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also a really big component of like why I chose my grad program, was that my grad program actually had a built-in component where I was able to gain that hands-on experience in the field that I'm interested in. And so when you're looking at grad programs, I would highly recommend to look for a program that kind of has that built-in hands-on experience in your program, because that's definitely a great segue into what an ideal career in that path would look like. And for me, I was able to use that time to do an internship with the federal government, which is what led me to my career right now. And then aside from that, I think grad school really helped prepare me for my career because they had a lot of diverse classes. And even though my program is like very niche health policy, I was still able to take a lot of classes in like global health, and then also like with the government policies, government writing. So it was really just a diverse range of knowledge that I gained, which also kind of helped me in the career that I am today. And then also just the connections that my school had really kind of helped me kind of get that foot in the door. And so definitely looking at where your school is located would be a huge thing. For me, I knew I wanted to go into policy, so what better place to go than the nation's capital? And so definitely, depending on what program you have, look into if it has like that hands-on experience, or if they actually have like some connections. Maybe your professors or program directors worked in a previous company or agency that you might also be interested in.
So Lorenzo, for you, since you're still in the early stages of your program, how is graduate school, like how do you perceive graduate school as preparing you for the career you had in mind?
Yeah, so to some extent, I think it kind of gets back at that, like the initial question about why a PhD. I decided, ultimately my heart was like, oh, I gotta get a PhD. When I was sitting in lab and I realized for the last, 3-4 years, I've been doing all this research, but really what I've been doing is I've been doing hands-on work, and then I take the results and I take them to the grad students and the professors, and they talk about what this means. And listening to them talk, I was like jealous. I was like, oh my gosh, they like know what the hell they're talking about. I'm just putting together pieces in a tube, and I don't know what the hell goes on after that. So that was kind of a big draw, is kind of wanting to enter that that like more scientific, quote unquote, expert space of having a greater grasp of what I'm actually doing here in lab, and how to apply that. I think grad school, or at least my PhD program specifically, has done really well with that. Getting in, or rather, I guess from observations, my PhD, or PhDs in general, focus much less on the undergrad energy of education, where it's kind of like, learn this and come back in 3 weeks and we'll have an exam. As opposed to really, it's like, I'm in a small classroom, we're having discussion sessions every week, and there isn't really a right answer, because we're all kind of fumbling around on the edge of what we understand about our topics. So the actual education is really around how to interrogate knowledge, how to interrogate what we know, what we don't know. It's kind of about a mode of thinking, and how to apply that in our research space. And so for me, this PhD already has been really great as just direct experience, as more than just a bench researcher. And with that direct experience, I also don't have this kind of, or rather I have less of an overhanging expectation, because this is an educational process. So I have a fair bit of independence. It's not like I have a hard contract deadline or anything. And it's a more forgiving space, right? It's like, I'm a student, so it's kind of expected for me to be like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Could you help? And so that's been a big part. I think also other parts about, how this has prepared me is, coming in, I knew I wanted to do this research work, but especially the longer I've stayed here, and because it's Berkeley and people are hella radical here, it's kind of formed, or rather prompted me to think about how I want my career moving forward to look like. Like, I know I want to do research, but that's not all I want to do, right? And I think grad school especially is this unique space where you're getting an education, but you're kind of between education and work. So you have this nice, really, or hopefully really well propped up environment for doing all that research, but also, in my opinion, you have a really great network access to and the ability to really dive into your other interests. In a way, you're almost expected to in some cases. And so while here, you know, I can handle all these different interests, like I do regularly do outreach, like science communication outreach stuff. I've been talking with like diversity, equity, and inclusion measures within my department and taking classes on that here. And I've also done a lot of teaching, both as a GSI and also just as part of my outreach stuff. And that's things I definitely wouldn't be able to do if I just hopped into industry or just hopped into working for a national lab. And so that's really helped me approach what I want my career to be in a more well-rounded way. And I think that's part of the focus of all this being this educational process. And the last point, I promise I'll stop talking after this, is I have, being where I'm at and being in this I'm fortunate that I'm in a pretty collaborative space. I work in a national lab, my department is smaller, so we collaborate and have access to a lot of other multi-department initiatives. I'm exposed to tons of different disciplines and facets of those disciplines, and people who are taking different avenues with their careers. Like, I know people who went to policy after they graduated with their biology Ph.D. or science communication. So it's really, being a first gen, I didn't know anything about what post-bachelor would look like. And now I'm in this space where I have tons of different examples of what I could be doing or where this work could go, depending on how I wanted my efforts to be. And I don't think I would have gotten that if I had chosen a different route than where I am.
So panel, y'all have so far talked about the why, and we've definitely touched on, how it prepares you. And all of you seem to have found the environments or the method of school that seems to have appealed but most to you. So I'm curious, what was the strategy in deciding between those programs? How did you determine, and what things did you consider to decide this is where I belong, this is where I'm going to get the most out of my grad school experience? And that's a pretty common question we got whenever people register, like, how do I decide? What are some criteria I should use? So Landon, I'm curious, how did you decide like Milwaukee is where you needed to be?
Who wouldn't want to just move up to the Midwest, right? No, I'm kidding. Milwaukee is amazing. For me, there were a lot of factors that play into this program or into the selection of a program, as there should be, right? Like, there should be a lot of reasons why you're picking a program. But for me, it boiled down to a couple of things. So I applied to 4 PhD level programs this last time around. And the reason I applied to those 4 was because the faculty member that I was applying to was someone that I could see myself working with. And they were someone that I was interested in their research. So on top of that, so that's, that was, a basic prerequisite for me. On top of that too, I also want to be in a lab culture, in a fun place with cool people to work with, right? Like, so not only does the faculty member need to be good, but the people I'm going to be working with for however many years also need to be good people that I feel supported around and enjoy talking to, both inside the lab and outside while we're just grabbing a drink in non-COVID times, right? And so on top of that too, being a person, a lot of the programs I applied to were in bigger cities, or, more progressive places, or more more diverse places. But being a member of the LGBTQ+ community, I also wanted to live in a place that was, a more, accepting place, somewhere that I was going to see people just like me, somewhere where my partner and I could walk down the street together and not feel not feel like there were a million eyes staring at us. Maybe there would only be like 500 eyes staring at us, right? No, I'm kidding. But you know, I wanted to be somewhere where I could have fun, be supported by my lab and my advisor, and also just enjoy the city I'm in. And I love beer and various forms of cheese, and Milwaukee gives you both those things, so it's a plus.
I was just going to add one really simple thing to kind of emphasize Landon's point. Definitely don't just focus on the name or the branding of the school. I definitely think the city itself matters just as much, because grad school is very grueling. It's not easy. And so you definitely want to have a city where you can enjoy, where you can kind of do other things and kind of be an environment that you're comfortable in. So definitely echo the sentiments of being in a city that you're comfortable and that you will fall in love with.
So we did get a question in the chat. Katarina wants to know, what is everyone's opinion on leaving your hometown for grad school? And did you find it more beneficial? Why or why not would a person find it beneficial? I can't speak this evening. Going to the same university where you completed your bachelor's, or would you venture off somewhere else? So no one here actually stayed at their home university, right? So can y'all comment on that a little bit? Like what were some of the factors that made you decide to sort of step away from a place you were already familiar with because you spent a few years there already?
For me personally, I highly recommend it. I do acknowledge that it's very situational, right? So for example, talking about A&M, right? If you did your undergrad at A&M, but then you want to get your master's in a particular kind of civic engineering or electrical engineering, A&M might have one of the best programs in the nation. So, you know, it's just kind of how it turns out. Or you might find a particular opportunity that works really well for you where you are. And if that's the case, by all means, take it. However, for me, grew up a small town kid, went to Texas A&M, which frankly is just a big version of a small town. I wanted my graduating, I'm going to be spending grad school. I'm going to be here for a while. And so I wanted that time to be different than what the rest of my life has been in some regards. I wanted the space to really grow into myself, like what Landon was talking about. You know, I decided once I graduated, I want to get the hell out of Texas. I love Texas so much. I needed to leave it to fully appreciate it. And that was a big part in me. Like, I didn't apply to any grad school in Texas. But from a, you know, can't think of the right word, but from like from an academic perspective too, I think it's beneficial to not bounce, but like go to different universities, because you also expand your network more than you would staying at the same university. And an academic network can be really important in a lot of ways. And so expanding that can be really nice.
So just to add a little bit to that, because I moved a short distance away from home to go to undergrad, but Denton is a very different town than the very small town where I grew up. I think you might agree with that. But I live in Houston now, but I chose an online master's program, which allowed me to keep my job and to continue working. But the benefit of the online program, like Lorenzo was saying, it allowed me to expand my network even farther into the world. I worked in my cohort, we went through the program together. So I had a couple of different girls who live in South Korea, who live in Qatar, who live in Colorado, New York, all over the place. So we were able to really get to know each other, get to know the culture of where everyone is living and the experiences that they've had at these different universities, which expands our network, but also our ability to kind of see different perspectives through what we were learning in the classroom, and to hear examples from different cultures around the world. So I think that's worth considering. And like they said, I would not just go for the top ranked school or, New York's best, whatever list, whatever that is, US News World Report list. I think it's about finding the fit for you, for what you want, and for what you want to get out of the program.
Great. So do y'all have anything else you'd like to add in terms of if people are considering multiple programs, any other Any other experiences you want to share with, comparing and contrasting and trying to make your decision, or should we jump to the next question?
I have a quick ad, and if you're like me, I do really well with spreadsheets. So I made like a rubric of needs where I had, location, program type of research going on, etc. I basically broke down all the different things I wanted to consider in grad school, and I weighted them. So I was like, I really don't want to live somewhere where it's going to be like snow for 8 months out of the year, or something like that. And I use that to really help guide any decisions. And then all your other interactions can go into actually making final decisions. But that was really helpful for me.
I would also just factor in transportation, because a lot of grad schools that you might be looking at, it's hard to transport your car. It might not be like a drivable distance from where you live. Like for instance, for me, for DC, there was no way I'm going to bring my car up there. Parking is expensive. So I really had to look at, okay, can I get to school A? B, can I get around? And both of those answers were yes. So definitely look into like, can I get around without a car? Is there like a bus system that my university that I'm looking at offers? So those are important factors too, I think.
So panel, my question for y'all now is, what do you wish you'd known earlier in your application or grad school search process? What are some things that people should keep in mind that you probably either had to learn the hard way or just took you a little bit longer to pick up?
I can start this off. I think something that I wish I knew was like, it's okay to not know what you want to do going in, because I had like an idea of what I wanted to do, but literally like one class changed that. So it just made like a whole 180 decision on my like life outlook, as dramatic as that sounds. But definitely like, don't go in thinking to any grad school, like, oh, this is what I have to do, or this is like what I need to think I need to do. I think it's very flexible, and that's what grad school offers, is just a wide variety of opportunities, of extracurriculars, of professors and knowledge that you can kind of just think to yourself, okay, maybe this is something that I'm interested in, or it's okay to take a different path. So definitely, like, if you don't know what you want to do, then that's okay. Grad school will help you kind of narrow your focus. That's what it's meant for.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else that y'all would like to add in terms of things you wish you had known during your process?
I think I'll answer this with something that I would also apply to, I believe it was Reagan and Jolene's questions. I think they kind of all connect together. So I would recommend in the process, I wish I had just talked to my undergraduate mentor in my major earlier about my application process. It would have made it a lot easier to narrow down where I should have applied. And when I was applying to PhD programs, that's the first thing I did, is I sat down with my master's advisor and was like, where do you think is a good fit for me? Related to that, with the international programs, I'm not familiar with all of the intricacies of that, but I think I would highly recommend that if you're considering that, reach out to someone in your department, in your field, who can tell you about the merits of a program in one country or another. And then I would also consult with someone at your university, if you're still currently enrolled, who specializes maybe in managing, foreign exchange students, like, or, sending people abroad. Like, talk about that application process. I would say most universities have resources that can help you with that way. So I would say, if you're considering something like that, I would make sure that you talk to people ahead of time and don't go in it alone, because you may miss something important about how difficult is it to get a visa there, or what is travel like, or is this program going to be acceptable back in the United States? Like, is this degree going to carry some weight back in the US? Something to think about.
So jumping back up to Jolene's question, did any one of y'all apply to an international program or look at international programs and consider applying?
I didn't, but I had a lot of friends that did,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually, finished their degree at one of them at the London School of Economics, I think. And the career path that I will say that a lot of people that do go into international programs are more careers that are internationally focused. So a lot of international NGOs. My friend, she now works for the United Nations. And so things like that. So if you really have an international focus, then I think an international program would do you, just fine.
We do have a couple of alumni I know of that have in this last year gotten into programs and actually gone overseas to school. So I'm going to make note of your question, Jolene, and see if we can get you connected with them on Terry Connect. I'm thinking specifically of an A&M alumna who's in vet school in Scotland now, I believe. So I know we have people in this network, even if they're not on this panel, that might be able to answer your question. But I'd like to actually jump down to the next area I want to discuss, which actually was asked in the chat. Let's talk grad school interviews. What advice do y'all have to help people prepare for the interview process when it comes to graduate school?
I guess I'll go first. I think my remarks are a little bit short. For my online program, I had online interview, and this can be done in a lot of ways. You might be interviewed by a panel like this, or you could be interviewed by a single person. My interview was actually over Skype, pre-Zoom days, I guess. And I was interviewed by an administrator from the department, and then that was shared with faculty in the department. So I wasn't speaking directly to the faculty. So I would suggest when you get that offer for an interview, ask questions about what is the setup, who's going to be in the interview with you, what platform they want to use so that you can practice if it is an online virtual interview. I also suggest rereading whatever you submitted to them, your personal statement, essays, whatever you had to do, and research that program thoroughly before that interview. Even if you researched it back when you were applying, look over those notes. Like Lorenzo said, he made a chart, like look back at that stuff so that you will be prepared with specifics about why you're interested in that program. A lot of the questions are directly related to why you want to go to that specific program, from my recollection. I would also come up with examples of things that you can include in your answers. For me specifically, because the program was about higher education, they asked me, were there times that I had fill in the blank, and then you need to have those examples ready. Also, if it is research related, or if you're trying to get into that program because like Landon was really interested in certain faculty, bring that up, make sure that you talk about their research and why that's interesting to you. And that doesn't mean it has to be like a biology lab or anything. It could be a business professor, whatever program that you're going into, it doesn't matter. And definitely do a practice round. If you need to Zoom with a friend or whatever ahead of time, make sure you know how to use what it is, because you don't want to be stressed on that during that specific day or time when you're doing your interview. So those are my points, but mine was completely virtual, and that was even prior to the pandemic. So definitely let someone else talk to you in person and how travel that goes.
Yeah, so speaking of in person, I definitely want to echo the importance of researching your options before you get there. The way I describe it is interview season is like dating, except it's totally okay to stalk beforehand. Like both parties have done a lot of stalking coming into this. You want to get as much information as you can to make a really informed decision when decision time comes. And so with that comes, a lot of like looking at different, professors you might be interested in, or different aspects of the program, and coming in with these questions. But also, I really, really, really advocate for asking hard and difficult questions, especially to current grad students in that program, because they're the ones that are usually going to tell it like it is. We're probably exhausted or tired for various reasons. We're going to BS you a lot less. Examples of that, of what I think are really good questions to ask might be, do you feel like the work culture in your lab, this program is healthy? Or do you feel supported here? Why or why not? These are like kind of maybe a little broad questions, but a lot of grad students will hop on that to tell you any of the details you need to know before you get there. And bring up these questions, at least in my experience in in-person interviews, any good interview gives you ample time with people currently in the program, whether it's like a social hour or some kind of excursion or something like that. They give you plenty of time with people absent professors and people in the admissions process. So you can, it's kind of like a safe space to ask these difficult questions. And, you know, bring these questions up to multiple people. Different people have different preferences, so you're going to get different answers. Kind of another thing regarding those question things, especially for people as part of the, you know, Black, Indigenous, person of color, or LGBTQIA+ community, you definitely want to ask questions about the general vibe of a program or a place. During your interview process, you know, if you're talking with like a particular professor, feel free to ask them what their department has been doing in regards to, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, anti-racist efforts. I know I'm definitely coming at this with a Berkeley energy, but like in general, you want to pay attention to these things. Not in academia, not a lot of places do a great job, but you don't want to end up in a place that doesn't care, does a terrible job, because grad school's hard enough already. And when you're dealing with BS related to your identity like that, it's better to be in a place that at least has some sort of supportive environment for you, as opposed to not. That's a really big issue for a lot of people with such identities going into these spaces. But, you know, going on from that, as more of the in-person process, more tips is like I recommend also talking with other interviewees there, people that are also interviewing for the grad program. They have either been to other interviews, have had conversations with people on their own and can talk to you about that. And also it's just, these could be your future classmates. So it's good to get to know them. And finally, if you're talking about in-person interviews, you're probably talking about travel. And I know we're all Terry scholars, so our finances are more or less okay, but still it adds up. And you really want to make sure that you understand what the cost situation is going to be like. Some programs will pay up front, like Berkeley paid for my flight. I didn't have to pay that, but they didn't, you know, obviously they couldn't pay for like my gas expenses or anything of that nature. Other programs expected me to buy the flight and would reimburse me later. This reimbursement process is notoriously not super fast. You definitely keep that in mind. And also a reminder that these programs have a vested interest in getting you there. So if you can't upfront the costs, reach out to them, they'll probably figure something out. And yeah, at the very end of the day, when it comes to in-person interviews, especially if you're interviewing in more than one places, you might also want to consider how much time it's going to take you. I only ended up interviewing at 2 different places. I was going to do 3, but I already made my decision at that point. Each interview took like 4 days of my time, which I was doing this during like my final semester of senior year. So, you know, it throws a wrench in some stuff depending on how you're doing it.
So I really quickly wanted to jump back up to a question that was asked earlier, and this is Gurpreet's question. Not everybody is thinking about research when they think about graduate school. So those of you that didn't have a super heavy research focus in your program, can y'all talk just a little bit about how you decided between programs when it came to making your decision?
Sure. I think for me, the biggest thing was just the location and then also the connections. And I didn't just choose Georgetown for the name. I chose it because of the alumni and the type of studies that they're in. And so kind of knowing that that's how I envision myself, either in like foreign affairs or domestic policy, that's really kind of the path that I wanted to go on. And then also the biggest thing is the professors. A lot of the professors at Georgetown are very like renowned. One of the professors that I really, really enjoyed, she worked specifically in health policy for the Obama administration. So these are the type of people that I was able to learn from, interact with one-on-one. So that definitely helped make my decision. And then also just kind of thinking about finances too. And I think that we'll touch on that later, but what's like affordable for you? What can you handle? And then also just looking at like housing and things like that.
Yeah, I would say similar to Zara, when I was comparing programs, I specifically started looking at what the coursework was, because some programs are very generic course names, like you're going to take accounting, but it didn't like go into any details or anything. So I was looking at what are those courses? Do those sound like things that would be interesting to me because they're required? Look at what options you have as far as do you get to take electives and how many, and what can you do there? And then I was looking for a program focused on practitioner, not just theory. So while we did do some things related to research and we did assessment and things, we were focused on how you actually do the work and what the work is like once you're working in higher education. So I think that's part of what you'll see once you start looking at specific programs, and you'll figure out which one vibes better with you.
Great. So I want to thank everybody that's sharing your feedback in the chat also. I'm keeping in mind that we're in the last 10 minutes of our discussion. So I just want to note for everybody really quick that if we don't get through everything that we had shared in the agenda for tonight's meeting, the panel's preparing a deliverable that's going to talk about interviews, GRE, financial aid, just some of their tips. So if we don't get to everything this evening, we'll be following up with a PDF that has some of their advice as well. If we go a couple minutes past 7, also it's being recorded. If y'all need to stop right at 7, feel free to jump off. We'll be able to share the recording with you later. But I did want to kind of jump to the next thing just really quick. Do y'all have some advice about exams like the GRE? That was another thing we got questions about during registration as well.
All right, look, the GRE is not fun. None of those exams are fun. But up until COVID, graduate programs had not given you much choice in the matter. I'm fortunate in that my field of study doesn't really require a GRE. Like, they require it, but they don't care about it. So when I was studying for the GRE, I studied for average, right? Like, I wasn't trying to ace the GRE. I studied in order to make sure I got a 50th percentile score that would look good enough on an application. So I would think and ask people in your field or look up specifics of the programs you're going to apply to and see how important is it, what score do you need to aim for, and then I would build your study plan around that, right? So there's tons of great options out there. I used Magoosh, which is a website that offers GRE prep. It was great. I would say ultimately just, find a study plan. If you have test anxiety, just give yourself, a few months to kind of prep for it and take some practice questions, learn the different patterns of the test and the formats. The test is not necessarily testing your knowledge about each individual area. It's more about the logic of ruling out answers. So at least for the GRE specifically, it applies more to that. For the others like MCAT, LSAT, those are a little different. Probably should take those more seriously than I'm talking about the GRE. But I think ultimately, look at the programs that you're thinking of applying to and see how important is it, and then build your study plan off of that.
So did any of y'all retake it?
One and done.
And okay, so like we mentioned, we're going to put some additional tips in the after session deliverable. If anybody is interested in a GRE specific event, definitely feel free to post that in Terry Connect, and we'll see if we can put something together if anybody's super curious about that. I did want to make sure we got to financial aid though in our discussion this evening, because I know that's a big question for people. How do you pay for your graduate school? How do you decide what is the best way to pay for your graduate school? So panel, I would definitely appreciate if y'all would touch on that a little bit for our attendees this evening.
Sure, and I think, and a lot of my panelists probably think this the same, is that a hard reality is that there is limited funding for grad school, especially for like master's programs. I'm not really sure about PhD programs, but I can speak for master's programs is that there's not that much funding. And I think as Terry scholars, we're very fortunate to have received fully funded education for our undergrad. So I think I actually went in with the mindset that, oh, maybe I can get like a full scholarship for grad school. No, like it's very, very hard. Although there are some cases, I guess it just depends on the program. But for me specifically, what I ended up doing was I actually reached out to my program director and I kind of, explained, hey, do you guys offer any financial aid? This is kind of my situation. And just based on me reaching out, having a conversation, then them understanding like my application, seeing it a little bit more, they actually gave me a partial scholarship. So it helped out significantly. And that might not be the case for a lot of programs, but I think it just doesn't hurt. Like reaching out to your program director can really kind of give you a way to see what your options are. And if they can't specifically offer you some scholarship, then maybe they can direct you to some resources that can help. And so I think there's definitely funding that's there. It's just a matter of going and looking out for it, reaching out to the right people. So yeah, definitely it's don't get hopes up, but it's not bad, right? I mean, we are blessed to have the opportunity to not accrue debt during our undergrad. So I'm okay with, taking on some loans right now. And so I think it's just a matter of what the situation is for you and what your program can give.
To just real quick to speak on the PhD situation a bit, specifically STEM PhDs, the funding situation is a bit different depending on the institution. It's not uncommon for you to have a guaranteed funding situation. So my program on the website, before I even applied, said funding is guaranteed. You will not, like, I get a living stipend, my tuition is covered. Granted, I still have fellowships and stuff, but really the department is the one that has to worry about where that money is going to come from, not me. So I would say that if you're looking at PhD programs in STEM, specifically, it gets less consistent outside of STEM. Do your research, looking at different institutions, see what their website says, ask their advisor, grad advisors, or whatever, what the funding situation is like, and get an idea of how common it is for your field to have funding. And I highly recommend only doing a PhD. If you're doing STEM PhD, I highly recommend being really picky and making sure that the place you're going to is guaranteed funding, because PhDs are hella long, they can be hella expensive. So you want to make sure that this is airtight.
All right, well, we're getting down to the last couple minutes of our session, and we originally were going to have a little bit of a discussion about working while in graduate school. And while that is important, I think that's something we can share in the follow-up materials panel. I actually would like to end things by having each of you share one thing that you've done to take care of your well-being while a graduate student. And we can go, I'll start with you, Holly, and then you can just popcorn it to the next person.
Okay, well, I was hoping to not go first, but I think number one, self-care is super important. And I think that it is going to be unique to your circumstances on what makes you feel better when you're stressed or when you're anxious. I just put in the chat that one of the biggest things that I learned in grad school is not to be afraid to ask a question. Don't waste a week being super stressed out because you don't understand what the topic of the paper is supposed to be about or whatever. Ask. For me, I was in a cohort program, so I had classes with the same people every semester. Make a study group, make some sort of community within your program so that you can talk to other people about how things are going. One thing in our program, one of our finals was supposed to be ridiculous, and then COVID hit, and we were like, how are we supposed to do this and deal with everything else falling apart? So because I graduated in May of this year, so it was very hectic last semester. So basically we all came together and went to our professor and was like, hey, I know you wanted us to do this thing. What if we did this instead? It applies to our job. It applies to real life right now. And that was the purpose of your class. And he was like, cool, thanks for coming up with a new idea, because he was finishing his PhD dissertation that semester too. So it was very it aligned perfectly. But I think also being honest with yourself is super important. Be honest and make sure you set aside the time to do something that is not working 40 hours a week or more and not working on school. And be honest with yourself about when that works. It might not be the same every week, it might not be the same every day, but make that time a priority.
All right, Lorenzo, you want to go next?
So for me, I would say it's really important to, and it's kind of one of the reasons I ended up coming here to Berkeley, is it's really important, in my opinion, to have a life outside of grad school when possible. Like having consistent hobbies, like for me, that looks like, going out, doing hikes and national park trips, concert going when, pre-COVID, a sport, stuff like that. Having things that are not directly related to all the stresses that are inherent in grad school, that whenever things aren't going bad or are going bad, quote unquote bad in your progress in your degree, or even when they're going well, you have a space you can go to and you can completely disconnect. You almost forget you're even doing all of this work. I think that's super, super, super important. If you try and stay immersed in the energy and the mental energy and emotional energy the grad school requires for like all day, every day, it's going to be a rough time. So I definitely recommend seeking outside stuff. And I also do, I know you said one, but I want to do a quick plug just because it's not super accessible to everybody. If it is accessible for you, I highly recommend finding a good mental health resource setup, like group therapy, individual therapy, especially for me, first time living outside Texas, new place, big city, right? Therapy was like instrumental in me not self-destructing after a few months of being here. So if it's accessible to you, I highly recommend you look to that opportunity before it becomes a problem. And popcorn to Zara.
I haven't heard the term popcorn in so long, so it's funny to hear that. I think for me, and this isn't something we touched base on, but I think it's important to discuss, is that a lot of the stress that I had from grad school was not so much from the course load, it was from my peers, because I came straight from undergrad. And a lot of the people in my cohort were in the industry for years, or they already had a master's, this is their second master's. So for me, it was just stress from establishing my credibility. And I think that's important because it has an effect on your mental health. And so for me, what I did was, as Holly and Lorenzo mentioned, I really tried my best to kind of remove myself from that school environment situation and do things that I love. And one of that is volunteering and the other is traveling. And being on the East Coast, you're so close to like New York, Philadelphia, just a train ride away, very affordable and accessible. So that's something I really loved. And then also volunteering. I volunteered at a local soup kitchen, met some really awesome people. And so I think the best thing to do is like, remind yourself that it's okay to do extracurricular activities. It's okay to do other things outside school. Even though so much money was invested in grad school, you might feel a little bit guilty, like, oh, why am I spending so much time doing this? But it's important to do those things because at the end of the day, you're in grad school for an experience, not necessarily just to learn.
Yeah, and just building off of what everyone has said, I think it is just so important to have that support system around you. Grad school is not easy. It's hard. It's made to be hard. And if you are struggling or are dealing with something difficult, personal stuff comes up. You're going to be going through a lot. Grad school right now, undergrad right now is really stressful. Talk to someone about it. You can talk to your faculty about it. They care about you, even though when they're giving you that hard test, it may not feel like they care about you in that moment. They do. And I know from personal experience that from talking to faculty, they beat themselves up with seeing their students struggle. So don't be afraid to talk to them and, build a relationship there. And also prioritize your break time. If you have to schedule it in, schedule it in. You buy a planner and schedule it in and protect your free time to just sit on the couch and do nothing. That is so important, because otherwise you will burn yourself out and you won't be communicating with anyone about that. So use your resources.
Can I add one more thing on top of what Landon was just saying? He hinted at it, but communication is so important. So with your faculty, with your friends, with your boss, with your family, finals comes close to a lot of things that families want to get together for, whether that's, Christmas or Thanksgiving or Easter or whatever other holidays are, out there, family reunions, all that kind of stuff is going to keep happening while you're in your master's program or your PhD program. Be honest and upfront with everybody, like, hey, this is when I have to defend, and I'm not going to talk to anybody this week, or like whatever it is you need to do to get those things done, like communication, just to set that expectation ahead of time. That way you don't feel that extra pressure. And I don't know about y'all, but my mom will guilt me into, well, why aren't you coming to see us? That kind of stuff. Like, just be upfront about, especially if you're traveling away from home to go to a program, that travel adds even more on to trying to visit home. So just be very communicative about whatever it is that you have on your plate and how to handle your stress as well.
All right, well, panel, thank you all so much for sharing your experiences, sharing your wisdom this evening. I feel like, we easily could go on for hours and hours and hours. There's so much to unpack here, but I really appreciate what y'all were able to share with everyone tonight. Thank you to everybody who asked questions. Y'all remember, everybody on this panel is on Terry Connect. They're also sharing their contact information in the chat. You have a built-in support system being part of this community. Don't be afraid to reach out either to someone on this panel, or if someone in the audience asked a question that you're struggling with as well, find them on Terry Connect, connect with them. You're part of a network that goes so much larger than just your cohort at your Terry school. If you feel like there's still a little bit more you wanted to know from tonight, post that question on the news feed in Terry Connect, because somebody else who wasn't involved tonight might even jump in and answer it. I'll go back through and just look and see if we missed anything. And for those of you that I promised to follow up with by email, I'll certainly do that. Don't want to really keep anybody too much further into the evening. Just once again, want to say thank you so much, panel, and for everybody else who participated this evening. I hope everyone has a great night and a great rest of your week. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop.